From the studios of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta, I'm Dr. William Lester. Welcome to the Dogman Files, Part 3. My father once told me a story about something that happened to one of his uncles. Old Uncle Jim, to be precise, while hiking through the woods one day back in 1950. I hadn't heard this story before from any other family members down through the years. I decided to share it now because after hearing it, I realized that what my uncle encountered that day was a dogman. Although he was an avid hunter, Uncle Jim also enjoyed trekking through the woods, just a bit east of DeKalb County where he grew up. To give you just a little bit of perspective, DeKalb County basically is the east side of Atlanta. In those days, there were large wooded areas that extended further east into Gwinnett County and even into Rockdale County. The woods are still out there, but a lot of it's been cleared out for subdivisions and shopping areas. Anyway, like I was saying, he would often take long walks along some of the more well-established trails or along one of the numerous creeks and streams. He was on one such jaunt in October of 1950. It was mid-afternoon, and as he walked along Miller's Creek, he took special notice of the emerging autumn colors of the forest. There was also that familiar scent of earth and wood in the cool fall air. Although he wasn't hunting that day, he still had his old M3 fighting knife and his Colt M1911 with him, both reassuring companions that had been with him since the opening days of the Second World War. Eventually, he came to a point of the creek that he was especially fond of. About 10 yards down from the left bank of the creek was a large outcropping of rock. From this outcropping, there was an almost panoramic view of the woodland. This was old Uncle Jim's favorite spot. This was his point of observation, his place of thought and reflection, and his place of experiencing the glory of what each season had to offer. He could hear a breeze blowing through the trees and the accompanying rustle of leaves on the ground. These sounds blended perfectly with the slow, meandering waters of the creek behind him. But it was also something else that he detected riding in on the breeze. A weird scent, maybe? Was there a dead animal down in the brush? No. It was faint and unfamiliar. But from a slight intake of a strange odor in the forest came a growing, intense, sickening smell. It was putrid, sickening, an animal smell. Somehow he felt sure of this, even though he'd never smelled anything like it before. Not even back during the war. Then, something else happened. Like the smell, it was initially faint, but became more and more evident each second. It was the ground. It was the goddamn ground. There was a growing vibration in the ground. He could feel it. It was as if something large was walking in the woods toward that position. Then he could hear it. It was coming. What it was, he couldn't tell. Something wasn't right. It was clearly the sound of something walking on two legs. He'd had enough experience as a hunter and tracker to know. But there shouldn't be anything out here that would sound like that. Even a black bear wouldn't stomp through the woods that way. Jim went down to one knee, a purely instinctive move. He wanted the best possible angle on whatever this thing was. But what he saw coming out of the thicket and into a clearing was clearly something that could not exist. But there it was. A wolf. Or at least a wolf-like creature walking upright like a man, and over 7 feet tall. Although its legs were hocked out like a canine should, this damn thing had arms and hands with fingers instead of paws. Its body was covered in jet black hair, and it had tall, pointed ears, just like a German shepherd. But what Jim focused on were its huge amber eyes. Fucking huge. And somewhat slitted like you might see on a lizard. The creature looked around and at the same time held its nose up slightly, as if trying to catch the scent of something. But old Uncle Jim, he knew enough to realize that it was his scent that the creature was onto. Then their eyes locked on each other, and Jim put his hand on his holster. His blood was racing. Now, at that exact moment, the creature bared its teeth and let out a series of snarls and growls. It was like a frozen moment of reckoning that would most likely determine how this thing would play out. Jim took his hand away from the holster and remained there in position, still on one knee. He noticed that the face of the wolf thing changed, almost as if it recognized the process of de-escalation. The creature dropped down to all fours and again raised its snout, turned, and took off and cut into the thicket with incredible force and speed. As it disappeared, it let out a chilling howl that reverberated across the landscape. After that day, Uncle Jim still hunted out there, although never without his dogs. And he even kept taking walks, although not necessarily in that exact same area. Of course, like I said at the beginning, what he encountered that day was a Dogman. And of course, 1950 was a long time before the term came into fashion. And really before the idea of cryptozoology was anywhere close to the popular culture of the time. But things are different now. We know about Dogman. And this little bit of family history is enough to verify the reality of this creature for me. And knowing the Dogman is real should give any intelligent person reason to pause before taking a walk in the woods. I grew up an only child in rural Pennsylvania. I used to sneak out of my bedroom and go hang out in our backyard on summer nights when I had trouble sleeping or woke up in the middle of the night. This was around ages 6 to 8 during the mid-90s. I'd just go sit below the top of the backyard hill where I got out of sight of our kitchen window. There were trees to the left with a wild, open field across the rest of a mile-wide valley. We had a large hill with a bump in the middle that was perfect for sledding in the winter. Below that was a field with a deer trail cutting through the bottom of the hill, and a creek beyond at the center of the valley. On a clear night with a bright moon, you could see across the valley I grew up in about a mile to where my best friend's house had their floodlights on all night behind their house. Now look, when I say rural, I mean very rural Pennsylvania. Parent-teacher conferences were scheduled the first day of hunting season, and kids would often be out for a couple of days just for that. We had 2 houses in eye line of our house from that backyard, and it was more than 30 miles to the nearest Walmart. I also grew up being very familiar with deer, bear, rabbits, and even saw a mountain lion once while hiking with my family. All of this just to say I'm familiar with the wildlife in that area. The first night I saw Dogman was like any other. I was just hanging out, sitting in the grass, thrilled to just be doing something, although really nothing, that my parents didn't know about. I saw something moving quickly down along the deer trail. It was dark black against the rest of the night. Partway through its path from the woods beside my house, it noticed me and stopped. It was carrying something in its mouth that to me looked like a dead rabbit. We just stared at each other for what felt like a long time. It stood up on two legs and its ears were long enough to notice from a 35-yard or so distance. It removed the dead animal from its mouth and held it in its left hand. For some reason, that alone scared the shit out of me. And this thing was huge, 7 to 8 feet tall, and too thin to be confused with a black bear, which I'd already seen a few times by that age. Now the stare down continued for a long while. Eventually, it put its ears back down, put its front paws on the ground, and sprinted across the valley. And there I was. Just imagine. A 10-year-old boy having an absolute stare down with a monster. I don't think I ever said anything to anybody. Like now, I love having secrets. But after that first sighting, I went and sat outside a lot more. I remember once on a new moon, I sat out on the porch because I was too scared to go too far with how dark it was without the moonlight. Something else is totally crazy. I saw the Dogman 3 or 4 times after that. It was usually running into the woods by my house, which were more than 10 full acres owned just for hunting season. The Dogman creature never bothered me after that. But I remember I was really disappointed when it got too cold for me to go outside. Of course, as an adult, I know that it's probably all for the best. But back then, that 10-year-old boy was mesmerized by the sheer adventure of encountering this creature. In the last few years, I've been seeing a lot of stuff on the internet about Dogman. I noticed that a lot of people just throw out wild, ridiculous theories that aren't really based on anything except a willingness to seem analytical. But most of it's just foolish. I've noticed a pattern that many people seem to fall into, especially when they have a mystery that they just can't give solid, firm answers for. They simply proclaim that it must be, quote, interdimensional, and that seems to fix everything for them. Take a walk out in the woods someday. I mean, the real woods, not some suburban walking trail. If you have your wits about you, you will see very quickly that an intelligent, stealthy creature, even a large one, can elude human detection with relative ease. On second thought, I take that back. Just keep your ass out of the woods. This is something that happened to my wife, who was in my girlfriend and I about 10 years ago. We'd gone to watch a friend's band play and we were headed home from downtown Dallas. Now, I don't live in the Metroplex anymore, so I'm not really giving away any personal information. It was around 1 a.m., but for us the night was young, so we headed to her apartment in one of the South Dallas suburbs. It was a pretty well populated suburb, but by the time we got close to her apartment, the roads were pretty much empty. We exited the highway and turned onto the street that led to her apartment. But as soon as we passed the traffic light under the highway, we both saw it, plain as day. Stone sober and wide awake, we both saw a motherfucking werewolf-type creature exit a neighborhood street and calmly run in about 4 steps across a 4-lane road. It was about 40 yards in front of us, but it wasn't exactly the way I'd imagine a werewolf. I mean, it was completely canine. No human features at all except for the fact that it was on 2 legs. And I mean 2 massive legs. And the thing was about 7 feet tall, but the arms reminded me of like T-Rex arms. They were small and hung like dog legs. They seemed almost useless if the thing were trying to attack something. The head was also kind of odd. Besides being a typical dog color, grayish black, the eyes were bright, glowing yellow. And I mean yellow even when there weren't headlights shining directly in them. I mean, it was nothing like the glow that an animal gets from lights in their eyes. But the thing that stood out to me the most was that the eyes were binocular, kind of like a fish. I saw the eyes clearly even though he was completely profiled to us. I tried like hell to draw a picture of what I saw, but I couldn't figure out how to draw it without making it look over the top or cartoonish. The road we were driving on had heavy trees to the right-hand side of us. When it came out, it was running but crossed the road in just a few steps. It was big enough and effortlessly fast enough to know that a human couldn't have dressed up in a costume or something and do this. Now, there was an open field that the creature ran into. When my girlfriend and I got to where the trees broke, we both turned our heads to look, but it was long gone by then. I mean, after about 4 or 5 seconds. I think that the only thing that was said was me going, "What the fuck?" This thing was menacing as hell. When it was running across the road, I didn't get the sense that it cared that we saw it, or that it was even trying that hard to cross before we got closer. Now, I didn't feel fear, as if we were being threatened, but I did have a strong sense of disbelief. And again, it's not like we were in a rural area by any stretch of the imagination. When we passed the tree line, her apartment complex was literally another 150 yards or so up the road. We hurried in and just plopped down on the couch. We basically just sat there in silence trying to rationalize, I guess. Still to this day, I often think to myself, I mean, really, did this actually happen? But as soon as I close my eyes and think about it, those bright yellow eyes are still there. Let me tell you about the beginning of my insane adventures with a creature called Dogman. I was 12 years old living in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It was the summer of 2012 and it was hot as hell. One night I woke up between 11:30 and midnight and I was sweating like hell, so I walked over to the window to just crack it open. That's when I saw something in the tree line by our stock pond. We own no animals other than a small terrier, but the previous owners were commercial farmers. I watched for about 5 minutes before it emerged, and when it did, I was fucking horrified. It was a wolf-like creature, 6 to 7 feet tall, partially covered in dark gray hair that shone in the light of the moon. And this damn thing walked out on 2 legs and then very quickly dropped on all 4s and ran the 100 yards or so to the stock pond in seconds. It drank water for a while, then stood up on 2 legs again, and then I got a really good look at it. And I mean, this thing was horrible looking. The fur was all patchy, it was skinny, and it looked like it was covered with some kinds of injuries, but I couldn't tell. Years later, when I saw the 3rd Harry Potter movie for the first time, I saw that werewolf, and that's almost exactly what this creature looked like. Now, after it got through drinking water, like I said, it took off across the old cornfield and into the woods on the other side. Now, of course, I'd heard stories about the creature, but never really believed them until that night. About a week later, when I was out and around town with my folks, we heard that there had been an attack at a nearby farm, and 3 hogs and 1 horse had been ripped to shreds and eaten. That was my first encounter with Dogman, but it would not be the last. Strangely, I caught glimpses of these creatures fairly consistently ever since that first sighting, but never really got another good look at one of them until the fall of 2015, a month before we moved to Maine. Now, it was dusk, and I was outside with some of my friends playing with our Nerf guns, as young boys do, and man, those were good days. Anyway, after a while we got bored and started a fire. Of course, we told dirty jokes and laughed and giggled for a while. But then we started hearing noises in the woods, and the laughter died down. We all retreated to the woodshed and armed ourselves with axes, pitchforks, and the like before returning to the fire. About 10 minutes later, something rustled in the woods about 20 yards behind us, but no one dared to look and see what the hell it was. Finally, my friend Jeremy turned around to look, and the scream he let out could have brought down the barn roof. That's when we all turned around and saw one of them, except this one was way taller than the one I'd seen before. I'd say 8.5 to 9 feet, and was pure muscle and gray hair. It was on all fours, sniffing around the barn. But when Jeremy screamed, the thing looked at us, stood up on 2 legs, and snarled. That's when my dad came out of the house with his shotgun and screamed, "What in God's name is going on?" We all just pointed and screamed. Then he looked at it and yelled, "Go on, get!" and shot at it twice. It ran into the woods yelping, so my dad must have hit it. And we all went inside and locked the doors. My dad sat in his chair with the shotgun the whole night, and I swore I could hear scratching alongside of the house until daylight. Turns out, when we went outside the next morning, there were claw marks all over the side of the house. After that, everything was quiet until we moved, and I've never seen a Dogman since.
There are monsters everywhere. In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland, it's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster. In the Himalayas, a towering mountain range on the Asian frontier, it's the monster known as the Abominable Snowman. And in the forests of America, a beautiful wilderness stretching for thousands of square miles, it's called Bigfoot. Now comes a motion picture that shows you actual footage of these and other monsters. You'll journey to Loch Ness and watch what happened when John Cobb, British speed champion, attempted to set a new record on water in 1955. Ignoring warnings about a monster living in the lake, Cobb takes his boat onto Loch Ness. Cobb was killed. His boat disintegrated. Next, you'll join a 1951 expedition to climb Mount Everest. After months of preparation, Eric Shipton led his band of experienced, cool-headed explorers up the treacherous mountain. Higher and higher they climbed. Then, standing at the 19,000-foot level, where no man had ever been before, they saw an incredible sight. Footprints. Giant, man-like tracks stretching out across the snow as far as the eye could see. The footprints of the Abominable Snowman. And closer to home, in Marietta, Washington, you will experience the terror of Bigfoot. It all began on the night of June 6th. Rita Graham was sitting on her couch watching TV. Suddenly, a giant, hairy hand crashed through the window and groped about. The monster was next seen by Tom Stern, and 3 days later in a Boy Scout camp. In all, the small town experienced 12 encounters within 30 days. Bigfoot, the Abominable Snowman, the Loch Ness Monster. Just 3 of the monsters you'll see In The Mysterious Monsters, a shocking look into man's encounters with the unknown. The Mysterious Monsters.
Hiya, hiya, hiya. They're shrimply delicious. Hiya, hiya, hiya. You'll go for that mouth-watering, taste-tempting, meaty shrimp mixture all wrapped up in a crispy noodle jacket. It's a treat you can't beat. So come on, join the folks that are getting fresh, crispy Flavo shrimp rolls now at the snack bar. They're shrimply delicious.
My name is Dusty. I'm 29 years old and I come from Hood River, Oregon. I grew up along the Columbia Gorge. At the time this story took place, I was 7 years old, about to turn 8. We were living in a trailer outside of White Salmon, Washington. I remember one night I started having dreams. Vivid dreams that I still remember after all these years. In these dreams, I was in an alley. I was surrounded by brick walls and heavy rain was falling. I realized I was in a cage and I couldn't get out. Then I heard a low growl. I remember feeling it in my soul. Then a dark form stepped out of the shadows and was slowly moving towards me. I felt afraid, but for some reason deep down, I felt it wasn't there to hurt me. Then out of nowhere, it appeared clearly in front of the cage. It was a large wolf thing. It was standing on 2 legs and at least 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it wanted. I noticed that it had a powerful build and thick black hair. Suddenly it started attacking the cage, clawing and banging at the lock. And then it started trying to pry the bars open, but it couldn't. I felt like he was trying to communicate with me, but I didn't understand how. Then the creature vanished back into the shadows, and I woke up, drenched in sweat and afraid that this thing was trying to find me. Then came the night that scarred me for life. I was 9, and we moved back to Hood River, Oregon. My grandmother had a beautiful place up on Fir Mountain Road, so that's where I really grew up. There were not very many people in the area, and it was fairly secluded. My mom had a friend named David that lived down the way, and we went there a lot to go visit. He was a good guy, and I know my mom was sweet on him. On one visit, we spent the night, which was cool with me because he had electric guitars. Well, it started getting late, and I was starting to get tired. I was watching some TV and was laying on some blankets on the floor right next to a sliding glass door, maybe 3 feet away. I remember I started getting a weird feeling that I was being watched, so I started looking around the living room. The main light was off, but the TV was lighting up the room, and I was looking around when my eyes caught a glint of red eyes watching me through the glass door blinds. You better believe that I jumped my ass up out of those blankets on the floor and walked over to the sliding glass door. I opened the blinds without thinking, just knowing I'd seen something. And holy shit. Sitting there with its nose on the glass window was a giant wolf that had to be at least 400 or 500 pounds. It had thick black fur, and it had reddish gold eyes. I couldn't move. I felt powerless. Here I am, 9 years old, looking into the face of a monster. It was leaning its head down to make eye contact with me, and it didn't act aggressive, it just stared. And then, for some reason, I felt like it was trying to communicate with me. In my mind, I heard, "Open the door," and then I lost it. I could see myself reaching my arm over to unlock the door. Slowly, as it unlocked with that very familiar flick, the wolf creature had an expression on its face that I can only describe as an evil smile. For some reason, that sinister expression snapped me back to reality, and I flipped the lock back down and I shut the blinds. I ran straight to my mom, who was still awake, and I told her I needed to show her something. I don't know why I did that, but my mom was the only person I felt could help me. So I took her over to the window, telling her the whole time what I'd seen. Now, the truth is, I didn't think it'd still be there, so I opened the blinds for my mom to see. She turned on the living room light so she could see better, and she was going to turn on the porch light when I heard a low, deep growl, as if it was warning her not to turn it on. My mom opened the blinds to see what made that growling noise. There it was again, with its wet nose breathing deeply at the glass, now trying to look intimidating to my mom, like it was some kind of great warrior. I looked over to my mom just in time to watch her fall backwards and start screaming. I shut the blinds and calmed my mom down, explaining to her what happened. She finally got the courage to try to go wake up David, but for some strange reason, he wouldn't wake up no matter how hard we tried. I went back out to the sliding glass door, and the creature was stretched out across the porch. Now, at that distance, I could only see its outline in the light. The moon was just about full. The thing was looking directly up at the moon, almost motionless. I don't think I've ever been as afraid of anything as I was at that moment. I was in the presence of something evil. I ducked away for a moment to get a hold of myself, and when I looked out there again, the creature was gone. We never saw it again. To be honest, we rarely even talked about it, and even then, it was more like a look and a nod to acknowledge the shared horror. As for myself, this is the first and last time recounting this story. Take it for what it's worth. Believe it, don't believe it. I don't give a shit. I tell you this though, if some evil creature reaches into your mind to convince you to let it in, don't open the door. So before I get into this with you too deeply, let me give you a little bit of the backstory, and then on to the good part. I grew up outside Chicago, but spent my youth summers fishing, camping, and canoeing in Minnesota and parts of Canada. After college, I spent over a decade in the Army and spent a very good chunk of that overseas. Through all of that, plus recreational travel, I've seen a lot of things, and the purpose of this story is to convey to the listener that I've seen a lot, but I've never seen anything like what I'm about to tell you about. Currently, I'm living in Southwest Louisiana, working for the sheriff's office where I live. One night, approximately 1 year ago, I was patrolling through a small town, and I saw something. Now, I still have no clue what the hell it was, but I saw something. I just made a turn, and as I was heading south through the small town, which happens to have a decent amount of wooded area throughout the, quote, town, I saw something run across the road in front of my unit. The only way to describe it is all black, bushy tail, very similar to a German Shepherd in proportion, running on 2 goddamn legs. But it ran hunched far forward, similar to I don't know, I've never seen anything like that. The problem was, this thing's back was higher than the door-mounted rearview mirror on my squad car. Now think about this. That's what, 3.5 feet? Which means whatever this goddamn thing was well over 6 feet tall and running like the wind. So it ran across the street, maybe 25 feet in front of the car. And as soon as my brain processed what the hell I just saw, I turned around as fast as I could and turned on my LED scene light. Whatever it was gone. So here's where it really gets kind of interesting. It was probably around 2 a.m. or so when I saw whatever it was. So about an hour later, I swung into the local gas station to check on the night shift clerk. So we got to talking and he asked me the usual shit. How's the night? Any good calls? Anything crazy tonight? And I responded by saying, yeah, man, I saw something and it was weird. And I just turned off the highway to head south through town, and I'm not really sure what I saw. Now this clerk, mind you, I haven't described what I saw yet, or anything about, whatever it was. So he cuts me off and proceeds to tell about how just a few days earlier he was riding his bike just after midnight and how he saw something as well. And then he goes on to describe the exact same thing that I saw. I literally stood there dumbfounded and didn't say a word. Honest to God, it gave me chills every time I think about that night. The clerk was looking at how I was responding to what he described and literally said, "Oh shit, so you saw it too." Thank God I thought I was crazy. So later on I told the story to my brother, who's really kind of into cryptozoology. And he said there's no doubt that what I encountered that night was a Dogman. A trip down into the Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge is an exhilarating, fantastic experience. A couple of friends of mine and I go at least once a year. We love paddling through the swamp, even the lesser-known backwaters. Alligators glide through the tea-colored water. Herons and egrets wade through the tall grasses and water lilies. And there are black bears roaming through the hammocks and islands. Even though there are several overnight shelters, we really enjoy a more traditional camping situation. Plus the fishing is great too. Shell crackers, channel catfish, largemouth bass, bluegill. We really do love it all. The one thing we don't love though is the whole idea of Dogman. Although we've heard a few stories, we chalked up most of it to swamp folklore and bullshit. The area's been inhabited for a long, long time, back to the Oconee, a Timucua tribe that was there more than 800 years ago. So there's been lots of lore about giant alligators, Bigfoot, evil spirits, UFOs, and this damn upright walking wolf thing. On our first night in camp, we hit the music, grilled some burgers, and then broke out the bourbon and cigars. It was glorious. But before very long, we could hear the sound of something moving in the bush just outside of the general perimeter glow of the camp. Now, if you've never been down into that area, I can tell you right now that when I say bush, I mean a hard, dense thicket that in some places stretches out for more than a mile. Anyway, my friend Doug, and yes, by the way, we call him Dougie, saw a pair of amber eyes glaring at us from about 5 to 10 yards into the brush. It was just standing there leering. Then we heard more movement, and a few minutes later, my other friend Derek pointed out the same pair of eyes peering from another direction through the branches, thorns, and leaves. And we realized this motherfucker was engaged in outright intimidation tactics, observing us from different vantage points. The creature made that move a few more times, and we could see those menacing yellow-orange eyes until the thing had nearly moved along the complete bush line. By the way, each time we saw the eyes, they were easily 7 feet off the ground, so this creature had to be huge. And just in case the shit went sideways, we had a couple of 45s loaded and ready to show this damn thing some smoke. Eventually, the heavy sounds stopped and things kind of settled back into the normal night sounds of the swamp. Now, earlier that evening, We'd set out some lines hoping to have fresh fish the next day. But I bet you can guess what we found the next morning when we went back to check for fish. Nothing. No lines, no floats, no hooks, and for damn sure no fish. What we did find, though, was a fairly fresh line of large tracks, four-toed, clawed, and fucking huge. We never did find any trace of those lines and hooks, but it was pretty obvious that the creature was letting us know that we were not welcome. Anyway, that second day, we did some bank fishing, canoeing, and some light scouting around the area. Yeah, I admit that we looked around to see if we could find more evidence of the Dogman skulking around the vicinity. We did find a couple of pine trees with big, deep scratch and gouge marks about 9 feet off the ground. And no, it wasn't done by a bear. That night, we could tell it was out there, but further away than the night before. Every now and then we could hear a series of low rumbling growls, and then finally it let loose with an insane howl. We just looked at each other with that kind of recognition like, yeah man, this is some crazy shit. Early next morning, we made some coffee and fried up some bacon and eggs. We thought about doing a little more fishing, but decided it was probably better if we just packed up and got the hell out of there. Spending another night out there was probably not a good idea. It's strange in a way. We really did enjoy the trip, but of course, it would have all been a hell of a lot better without that goddamn Dogman. I'd like to share a very bizarre story with you. For the purposes of anonymity, I'll use the name Mike. I live in the Magic Valley of southern Idaho. Now, this is a desert area, but in my city of 60,000 people, there's the deepest gorge in America known as the Snake River Canyon. The canyon breaks off into several smaller canyons that run through my town. Also, just outside of Twin Falls, we have the largest lava cave system in the world. The first documentary film of Missing 411 was filmed not too far from where I live. So, it's a pretty interesting area to say the least. I'm a pastor here at my church called St. Mary's Christian Church and School. Our church has a private school as well, and my wife is a teacher there. It's one of the best and most sought after schools here in Idaho. Anyway, I have a really good friend who's a federal investigator, and we're both firm believers in cryptozoology. He's talked to me about portals and other things that he knows about being a federal investigator. Well, we have heard of several accounts of people seeing creatures in our canyon system. So naturally, we decided to go down to the part of the canyon that's literally down the street from my house. We wanted just to explore the area and see if there were any signs of these creatures in the area. Well, something did happen that led to a series of events that are still going on to this day. We weren't planning on staying very long, so we didn't take flashlights. Now, this was November of 2018. We drove from my house to the canyon and walked down the trail. Now, the truth is, we went to an area that's off limits, but my friend said he would take care of it if someone said anything. We hiked for about an hour, and we did hear a large growl, and it stopped us dead in our tracks. To us, it sounded like a mountain lion. We backed up, and we noticed about 10 feet up at a tree that the bark was just shredded like a grizzly bear or something, just tore it up. But we don't have grizzlies here in this part of Idaho. Now keep in mind, here in the canyon, it gets dark very fast, and before we knew it, The sun was setting. Like I said, we had no flashlights, just moonlight. My friend had a .41 caliber revolver on him. We started hearing twigs break and movement around us. Whatever it was sounded like multiple large animals. As we were walking, I was straight up terrified and was sure whatever was out there was going to just grab and pull me off the trail. All of a sudden, I saw a huge black mass on the side of the trail ahead of us, and then it ran across the trail on two legs. It was massive and even blacker than the dark around it. Of course, I was praying that my eyes were playing tricks on me. And then my friend said it just crossed the trail in front of us. He confirmed what I thought I saw, and I lost it. I tried to run, but he assured me it would be worse if I did. So we backtracked and hightailed it out of the canyon. And the thing, whatever it was, followed us the whole way back, making noises. We drove to my house and we opened a bottle of whiskey and were trying to get a hold of ourselves. But it doesn't end there. Personally, the scariest shit was still to come. About a week or so later, my wife told me that in the morning that something was on our roof during the nighttime hours. She said she heard a loud thump right above our room, right over our heads. She heard it walking around up there, and she was struck with fear. She couldn't even move. She said that it walked for a bit and it went quiet, and she somehow fell back asleep. When she told me this, I decided to go outside and look for tracks since it was snowing. And sure enough, there were these prints on my roof, but they were barely visible since the snow covered them. But they were also on my neighbor's roof, and their neighbors as well, almost as if it traveled on our rooftops to the canyon. I've got the pictures. So I called my friend and he came over. I said maybe it was a Bigfoot we saw and it followed us home. He said he didn't think it was a Bigfoot, but maybe a Dogman, or maybe even some other kind of weird creature. Now keep in mind, at that point, I hadn't heard of the term Dogman, but certainly had heard of Bigfoot. I started researching and freaked out when I heard all the stories about these creatures lurking on rooftops. I always heard them called wolfmen or werewolves when I lived in Texas, and my family lived in Michigan as well and talked about wolfmen sometimes. Well, about a week later, I was awoken around 3 or 4 in the morning by a thump. I listened and didn't hear anything else, so I went and checked the doors and checked on my kids. I couldn't figure out what the hell woke me up, but something did for sure. And my little puppy was acting strange. So I went outside, and there were more tracks on the roof again. This time there was no snow covering them, and they went on our roof, down to the ground, and towards the canyon again. I've got those pictures too. I think something followed me home, and we've had several other weird things happen. Since then, we bought an alarm system and weapons. I've tried to learn as much as I can about Bigfoot and Dogman. There are several accounts of weird creatures being spotted here in my area, and I need to know the true nature of what we're up against.
For the first 23 years of David Kessler's life, he was only human. Then one night he took a walk on the moors.
Beware the moonlets.
Is David behaving strangely?
Are you all right now?
Well, I'll let you know the next full moon.
Tomorrow night's the full moon. You're gonna change.
From the director of Animal House, A Different Kind of Animal, An American Werewolf in London. Rated R.
When I was young, I lived on a farm in rural Oregon with my parents. I was the only child. We weren't a big commercial farm, just a family type thing. We had 5 cows, 3 horses, small herd of goats, 2 dogs, and 1 chicken coop. We also had some Indian runner ducks we kept mostly as pets. We didn't really make any money off the place, just enough to sustain the animals and a little extra for ourselves. Money enough to take a decent vacation every couple of years. Dad had his other job in town as an insurance agent. He was the only one around, really. The town wasn't more than about 1,500 people. Mom gave horse riding lessons as well. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. It really was an easy life, or at least it could have been a lot worse. I went to school, Dad went to work, Mom took care of the animals. Then we all had dinner together every night, and I would go to bed while Mom and Dad had a beer or two and watch the news. Sometimes at night, I would hear things outside, mostly just normal stuff. The cows or horses would get spooked by a coyote or something, or I'd hear the dogs chasing a rabbit, barking their heads off. Every once in a great while, we'd find a chicken dead. Dad would always tell me about it, but never let me see the body, although I asked frequently. He would keep Mom and I inside until he'd gone out, did whatever he did with the body, throw sawdust over any blood, and then life would go on as normal. I always assumed it was foxes, as I'd seen a couple of them out in the pasture over the years, slinking around back and forth through the grass. The summer when I was 10 years old, I remember helping Mom change the bedding in the horse stalls when we heard a huge racket going on outside. Now, if you've never heard the sounds of a horse in pain, you don't want to, trust me. It almost sounds like a person screaming. Well, that's what we heard, and one of our horses, the Palomino, came running into the barn with a wound on its left thigh. 4 long marks, like claw marks, ran across its body for about a foot. It had blood running down its leg and was limping. I was scared shitless by the sight of that much blood, and Mom locked the horse in a stall and made me go inside with one of the dogs. She told me to lock the door and stay inside until she came in to get me. And I damn sure did. Eventually, my mother came inside and told me that the horse had hurt itself on the barbed wire that ran the perimeter of the pasture. We owned more land beyond that, but it was mostly forested. I guess I believed her at the time, but at dinner that night I noticed Dad was being particularly quiet, and Mom was talking a lot more than she normally did. She was being really animated, and I noticed that Dad had gotten his rifle out and set it by the back door. Usually he only did that when the coyotes had been acting up. That night, I went to bed as normal, but I had trouble falling asleep. I turned on my desk lamp and decided to read comic books until I got tired. I have a very vivid memory of reading an Uncanny X-Men and hearing the back door open. Looking out, I could see my dad by the porch light, lighting a cigarette and holding his rifle under his arm. He started walking over to the driveway and then turned to follow the fence line. Now, I couldn't sleep until I knew Dad was back safe. I kept coming downstairs with the excuse of getting water to see if Dad was back in the house yet, and each time all I saw was Mom sitting on the couch in the living room, staring at a blank TV screen. She had a worried look on her face and occasionally let out a sigh. Eventually, about 4 a.m, I think Dad did come back, and I was so tired and relieved that I fell asleep as soon as I knew he was home. He never told me what he did that night, but I never thought to ask. 2 months later, I was back in school. Now, it rains a lot in Oregon in the fall, and this particular day was no different. All I could hear from my bedroom was rain hitting the ground and the aluminum roof of the chicken coop. There was light thunder in the distance, but it was slowly getting closer. I thought I heard a coyote yapping out around the garage, or it could have been one of the dogs. I looked out, straining my eyes to see whatever it may have been. In the brief and distant lightning flash, I saw something, and it looked like a person, but hunched over, and with a long torso. It was taller than Dad, who was a good 6'4" at least. I just barely caught a glimpse of it on the near side of the garage. Then the light faded and I didn't see it again that night. There was another dead chicken the next morning, the third in just as many weeks. Now, I told Dad what I'd seen the previous night. The color went out of his cheeks momentarily until he told that the storm must have been playing tricks on me. And for some reason, I accepted that. 4 months after that, we lost a cow. It was in the middle of the night, and we all woke up at the same time. There was a lot of noise in the pasture, but only briefly. The cry of a dying animal and a primitive guttural yell that I've never heard before. My dad rushed up to my room. I heard him barreling up the stairs. He had his rifle in his hand and opened my door. He saw I was awake and told me to stay inside no matter what and try to go back to sleep. Now, I don't think I have to tell you that sleep wasn't really an option any longer, but I did stay in my room with a blanket held tight around my shoulders and staring out the window. Probably about 10 minutes later, I heard gunshots in the field. I don't know what he was shooting at, whether it was whatever had attacked the cow or the cow itself trying to put the animal out of its misery. Now, Dad rarely, if ever, talked about that night again. I later found out he'd gotten to the cow only to find it ripped open on the ground, bleeding out from its torso. The shots I heard were him shooting the cow in the head. It kept going on like that for years. A chicken or a duck here or there. Something bigger, only very rarely. It sounds absurd, but I almost came to think of it as commonplace. I only ever caught glimpses of the thing until what I'm about to tell you next, because it terrified me. It happened in the middle of the day over the course of a long weekend when my parents had gone to Seattle to see my uncle who was ill. It was on a Saturday afternoon. I was 17 years old. I was out in the barn putting out food for the horses and the dogs. The horses were running around out in the pasture and the dogs were asleep in the corner of one of the horse stalls. I heard something rustling in the tall grass outside in the pasture. The dogs looked around a little bit but didn't seem to mind. I assumed it was just one of the horses waiting for me to leave so they could eat. I went on about my business for several minutes, and then I thought I heard the sound of breathing. I turned to look, and it was standing in the door, tall as hell, even hunched over. The sun was streaming behind it, lighting up all the dust in the air around it like some kind of sickly halo. This thing was looking at me with the eyes of a predator. Maybe it was trying to decide whether or not I was food. I remember saying, "Shit," turned and ran as fast as I could for the house, not even thinking. Panic drove my motion. It was behind me, not even breathing hard. I heard its feet hitting the ground in constant rhythm. I got to the house, opened the door, slammed it behind me, and locked it as fast as I could. I tore ass through the house, locking every door, drawing the blinds on every window, and looked for a place to hide. I could hear it snarling outside the back door. The dogs were barking at it, but they wouldn't try to attack the thing. It was too big, and they knew it. It roared, and the dogs ran off, probably to hide in the pasture. I remember thinking to myself, fuck this. I went into my parents' bedroom and got Dad's rifle. I loaded it, set up a chair in the living room facing the back door, and waited. It started prowling around the house. I could hear its feet crunching on the gravel of the driveway and the wooden planks of the back deck. It kept walking, back and forth. I thought about trying to look through the window to see it, but I was too scared. Eventually, after hours of hoping it would go away, the sun went down. I turned on all of the outside lights and went up to my room. I opened my window with the rifle in my hands, hoping to be able to pick the thing off from above. I saw it lurking just beyond the glow from the porch light. It had long, sinewy arms and walked on bended knees. It was by the chicken coop. Then it disappeared from view. I can't tell you what this thing was, but it looked like a monster wolf. That's what it was. A gigantic wolf right out of some kind of horror movie. Anyway, I heard the chicken squawking and screeching. The thing appeared with a dead, bloody chicken in its hands. It bit off one of the wings with jaws that were dripping with slime and drool and let the dead bird drop to the ground at its feet. Then it looked at me. Its eyes made contact with my eyes. It turned away again, back to the chickens. It came back with another bird, mutilated it right in front of me, and dropped it. It went back again and again. I should have taken a shot at it, but I was astounded and confused, trying to figure out what it was doing. Then it hit me. It was a show of power. This motherfucker was showing me that it was stronger than me, that it could do whatever it wanted to do because I couldn't stop it. At the same time, I felt powerless and sickened. Powerless because what it was communicating to me was essentially true. It was just me and this giant wolf monster, and I knew I wouldn't stand a chance. I was sickened because I also realized what kind of intelligence it would need to be able to convey that kind of message. The thought shook me out of my stupor, and I remembered the rifle at my side. It was heading back to the chickens, and I decided that when it came back, I'd take my shot. It came back up to the porch, almost arrogant, walking on those haunched legs with those arms so long that the chicken was nearly dragging on the ground. I raised the rifle up to my eye and tried to steady myself. My heart was beating so hard I could see the rifle shaking ever so slightly in rhythm with each heartbeat I could hear pounding in my own ears. It raised the chicken carcass to its mouth, and just as it was about to put the chicken head inside, I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gun echoed in the low shattered quiet of the nighttime standoff, and I heard it howl. A painful, loud, startled howl. I had hit it on the outside of the shoulder. It ran off into the darkness. I never saw it again. It was still out there, though. It still killed chickens and other things, and more often than before. Now, I'm talking about all this now because my parents died about a month ago. They were killed in a collision with a drunk driver, and that son of a bitch survived. Anyway, they left me the farm, and I intend to live here with my own family. I'm 42 now, and I work for an Oregon Fish and Game office in Salem. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Stephanie. We have one son, Zachary, who's 4 years old. We're expecting a daughter in a few months. I've come to the farmhouse alone today. I told Steph that I just wanted some time alone in my parents' house to deal with some emotions, and she was very understanding. I've come back to claim what is rightfully mine. I have Dad's rifle next to me on the table, and it's almost dusk. I've also brought several portable halogen lights to set up around the house, and my own shotgun. I'm borrowing a handgun from Joe, a friend of mine that I work with at Fish and Game. If I have another encounter with the creature, it will be the last one. I'm going to get it, or it's going to get me. I wanted to share an experience that I had in relation to the many Dogman encounters that I've heard about on Blackwater Media. I thought it was important to put this out for the many people that perhaps never heard of this creature, or even for those who can't perceive that such things could even exist. The incident took place on the Sunday of the 2020 Memorial Day weekend during a barbecue that I was hosting for a few close friends. Without being too specific about the location of my home, I'll just say that I live about an hour and a half north of Atlanta, in some proximity to the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Now let me set up the scene, circumstances, and situation for you. I have a deck out back, and the backyard itself is nice size and borders a wood line with about 15 to 20 acres of forest stretching out to the north-northwest. The deck itself is elevated, of course, maybe about 18 to 20 inches, and going down 3 steps puts you right at ground level. Over the last several years, I've had people over on holidays and weekends on a fairly regular basis, and these get-togethers would normally go on in the nighttime hours, so I had a couple of floodlights installed around the deck as well as a pair of motion sensor lights on 12-foot posts out close to the wood line. Now on that Saturday, I'd gone shopping. I'd already decided to keep it relatively simple, you know what I mean? Burgers and brats with potato salad as a side. I'd wait till the 4th of July to pull out all the stops. But I did buy some Canadian Club and Crown Royal to set everything off just right. So Sunday turned out to be a nice day with just a few high clouds. I got the music cranked up and got all of the meat on the grill by about 3 o'clock. My friends started arriving a little after 4 and everyone made themselves a drink. With the food just about ready, the sounds of the music, conversation, and laughter began to fill the air. Of course, as did the aroma of cigars. Afternoon turned into evening, and as darkness began to creep in, I happened to take notice of some kind of movement, at least I thought it was movement, across the yard, and maybe 10 to 20 yards into the wood line. I wasn't certain, mind you, but it was just the impression of something moving back and forth in the brush and brambles. To be honest, I didn't think much of it at the time because it wasn't unusual at all to see a deer or the occasional fox or bobcat snooping around the forest edge. I didn't say anything to any of my friends at that point, but I'm pretty sure that some of them noticed my regular glances out across the yard. Then everything changed. It was dark now, and those glimpses of movement quickly turned into a rush of sounds and movement that started to catch everyone's attention. Then the motion sensor pole lights jumped on. Everyone was up on their feet now, with all eyes now zeroing in on the impossibly monstrous figure, now illuminated by the light, standing just beyond the fence. I could hear my friends muttering in hushed tones. What the fuck? What the hell is that? Holy shit. What we saw was a gigantic wolf-like creature standing there. Now, knowing the exact height of the lamp poles, this thing was clearly 7 to 8 feet tall, dark fur, and huge German Shepherd type ears. We could even see its huge chest moving in and out in a huffing-like breathing motion. The creature took a step forward and placed its hands on the top of the fence. Now, this thing had 2 giant clawed hands instead of paws, which is what you would expect, right? It took 2 or 3 side steps to the right, and as it did, we could see it adjust its grip on the fence. And we could also hear a low mumbling growl. Then the wolf thing let out a horrifying growl, and as it did, it motioned its head forward as if it were trying to project its fury at us. Just as the wave of that terrifying roar began to dissipate, the creature turned and dashed back into the woods with insane speed. Now, you might think that after that, everyone would have been scrambling to get to their cars to get the hell out of there, but that's not what happened. There was a few minutes of silence and head shaking. But then, everyone refreshed their drinks, sat back down, and we talked about what happened for another couple of hours. We talked about how this proved that all kinds of weird and bizarre things must exist and are around us all the time. That led to the sharing of UFO sightings, ghost stories, and just about everything in between. I think that my circle of friends grew tighter and closer that night. And despite the fact that the whole experience scared us all shitless, out of that abject fear came something higher, something greater. It was 1995 and I just graduated high school. I started hanging out with an old friend that I hadn't seen for years. And one day we just decided, hey, let's go to New Orleans. And we did. We had $140 between us, and back then that was more than enough. We made it to New Orleans and almost died from culture shock, turned around and headed to Magnolia, Mississippi to get some sleep. We stayed at Magnolia Inn. Now, it was a real shithole, but it was nice and cool. It was May or June, and in southern Mississippi, cool was the only adjective that mattered. We stayed up that night playing poker, drinking Gordon's vodka, and talking about who knows what, probably girls, college, and girls again. At some point I said, hey, ever been to Texas? He said no. Well, shit, pack your bag and let's roll. We had a road atlas, and Marshall, Texas was right across the border from Shreveport. Now keep in mind, this was really before the days of widespread cell phone use and nothing like GPS. Anyway, we arrived in Shreveport, made a phone call to another friend who we were actually supposed to be staying with. Now both of our mothers had called looking for us. The only person that knew where we were was the buddy on the phone. It was no big deal. We'd be home in a day or two. Now I'm going to be a little bit short on details because if I don't, this will turn into a novel-length story about chasing armadillos and being, well, shit, chased by the boogeyman. Before we left that rest area in Shreveport where we made the call, we actually saw an armadillo. Now let me tell you something about these damn things. Those bastards will hiss, jump, and turn into Tasmanian devils if you corner them. They also carry nasty shit like rabies and everything else, probably leprosy. And we were 18. We chased the armadillo around for an hour. Now let me tell you about Shreveport. I don't know how it is now, but that summer, it looked and smelled like a place where oil and metal went to die. It was dirty. It was the worst. We crossed the bridge and saw people fishing about 100 yards from where a drainage pipe from a factory was spewing forth waste upriver from the fishermen. The locals reminded me of the locals in Adamsville. Bald-headed women, cross-eyed men, a lot of bald-headed, cross-eyed kids. It was like a damn Rob Zombie movie come to life. Shit, I felt like a movie star because I had a full head of hair and could see straight. But Marshall, Texas was 40 miles away, so we rolled on. Marshall was a decent little town, home of the Fire Ant Festival. Can you believe that shit? We stopped at a little barbecue joint and had a Coke and some pulled pork. It was getting late and the sun was setting. We looked at the map and decided to backtrack a bit and head up rural Route 43 through Karnak and past Caddo Lake. We would eventually run into Highway 59, head to Texarkana, and then headed back home. When we left the barbecue joint and headed towards 43, it was dusk. Highway 43 wasn't well lit. It was almost as dark as Natchez Trace Parkway. I've got a good story to tell about using a pair of pantyhose as a fan belt for an old diesel Mercedes. Don't ever get stuck on the trace after dark. Ever. Anyway, my friend was driving and we were doing about 45 miles per hour. Any faster would have been reckless even for a couple of 18-year-old dumbasses, and I had no intentions of getting mixed up with a bunch of redneck cops down here in Texarkana. So like I said, the highway was dark and winding. There were lots of hills that ended in curves. There were beady and glowing eyes on both sides of the road. But I knew that these were just the critters that came out at night. Raccoons, foxes, coyotes, things like that. You could hear the crickets and the bullfrogs over the sound of the wind rushing by that old Sentra. It was peaceful and creepy at the same time. And that humidity was a real thing, tangible. The air was thick. It smelled like pastures, hay, and swamp. We drove for what seemed like hours, and it was after midnight, and I saw a sign that informed me that Bivens was the next town of any size. I was hypnotized by the yellow lines on the road. We hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. And I started getting sleepy, so I rolled the window down and lit a cigarette. There was music coming from the radio, or maybe it was the cassette player. I think it was something by CCR. I smoked my cigarette, absent-mindedly flicking ashes out of the window. I took one last puff and flicked the still-burning Camel short off into the woods. And then I saw it. I never looked to my right. I didn't even kind of peek to the right. Maybe I did a little when I flicked the cigarette away, I don't know. What I do know is that in my periphery there was something running alongside the car. It was just behind my window, behind where the edge of the door ends and before where the back window begins. I looked over the speedometer and it said 40 miles per hour. I looked at my friend and he was looking straight ahead, so I looked straight ahead. I could see it. I could see one huge arm, matted hair, reddish brown, sticky looking, and primal. I eased my right hand over and rolled up my window. My friend was still looking straight ahead. His jaw was clenched, and he put both hands on the wheel and sped up. Neither one of us said anything. I looked straight ahead, and still out of my periphery, I could see that arm moving, muscles and tendons visibly rippling beneath that matted hair. As the car gained a little speed, the thing running alongside us lost pace slightly. And then I saw the hand on the end of that nightmarish arm. The hand was clenched into the fist the size of a cantaloupe, and I mean a big goddamn cantaloupe. It was covered with the same hair but slightly darker around the fingers, like it was stained with something. Suddenly the hand unclenched, and then I saw the claws, black as the damn Texas midnight. Those claws were at least 2 inches long, sharp like an animal's. And it wasn't a hand so much as it was the killing paw and claws of some beast whose only purpose was to kill and eat. I looked back at my friend. I looked at the speedometer again. 50 miles an hour. I looked straight ahead. It was still there. Shit, I lit another cigarette, then rolled down the window and simply said, "God damn." For some reason, the music had stopped. I finally broke the silence and said, "Hey, do you..." And before I could finish, my friend said, "I see it. I've been seeing it. I can't even see you, but I can see whatever the hell that shit is. How much do you see?" And I said, "More than I want to." So I said, "Speed up, man. Just speed up. It can't keep up forever." I looked over. 55 miles per hour. Whatever was chasing us was thankfully starting to lag behind. I finally worked up the guts to look over to my right, just a bit, imagining the scary part of the movie where you put your hands in front of your face but still peek through. Now, I'm 37 years old and I have 2 regrets. One I have to keep to myself, and the other is me looking to my right that night. This beast was huge. Its chest was above the top of the car, and all I could see was that matted, reddish-brown hair. Then it bent forward as it ran. And I mean, this motherfucker was leaned in and moving hard. When I saw the face of this thing, all reality stopped. We were no longer driving down some country road in Texas. We were now trying to escape from the depths of a monster-inhabited hell. Now, this thing's face is almost beyond my power to describe, but I have to try. I have to try. I can tell you it was evil. The eyes were black and the pupils were amber orange. flashed its teeth at me in a snarl, yellow and huge. Saliva dripped from its mouth. It opened its eyes wide and looked hungry and pissed off. Then, it opened its mouth. The skin pulled back until all you could see were those black gums and yellow teeth. Immediately, I could feel the car accelerate. Fucking hell, man, just go. I prayed, I cursed, I lit another cigarette. Then, like sunshine breaking through the clouds, the road straightened out. I said 3 words to my friend. Don't slow down. We drove through Bivens and we drove to Texarkana. Then we drove home. We never said a word. It was years later, 11 to be exact, before we ever even talked about it again with each other. And even then, we didn't talk about it much. He said he'd never told anyone. And I told him I mentioned it briefly a couple of times. I told the story a few years back for the first time to my girlfriend. The only other time was about a year ago when I told it to a couple of kids who wanted to hear a scary story while they sat around a campfire. They didn't sleep for a day or two, but they asked me a dozen more times to tell them the story. I never told anyone until now that I actually saw the creature's face. Look, I've been scared exactly 2 times in my life. One was on that road, and once was looking at a grizzly bear in front of me with a terminal velocity inducing drop to the side of me. Call it what you will. Call it bullshit if you want. But look me in the eyes and let me tell you this story and you'll know. Never doubt that there are things in this world that defy explanation and logic. Monsters are real. Years after this incident happened, I happened to run across a story in a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek. You know, the one about the Fouke, Arkansas monster? It isn't that far from Bivens, Texas, as the crow flies. You ought to invite me over sometime. Offer me a drink. Sit on the porch with me, and I'll tell you the story over a pack of Marlboros and whiskey. And then we'll see how many nights you can go without sleeping. My name is Mike. I'm 63 years old, recently retired from a soul-sucking IT analyst job for a major bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was just a cog in a big money machine that facilitated the movement of money across the globe. East to west. You can call it dollars, euros, yen, or rupees. It's all the same. Money flows like a river. It has currents and eddies, up and down, diverted to and fro. Damned and damned. You see trillions of monetary units flowing across the world and wonder what it might be like if only a small percentage of it were diverted to help people out. Maybe we could stamp out war, feed the hungry, healthcare for all that need it. But that's not the game I had to leave behind. I'm not here to comment on the vagaries of modern society. I'll leave all that to the poets, priests, and politicians who are paid for their words and for their lies. So, I retired to the country, not off the grid, but close enough to see the edge, close enough that I can see the footsteps of those that came before, the early pioneers and settlers, the wagon tracks and homesteads of a long-dead chapter in early America, a time of exploration and discovery, and a time when one man was deemed only a percentage of what makes up another man, by law. A time where cotton and tobacco were the currency of the world, and they truly flowed on rivers after being harvested on the backs of slaves. I have a best friend who's named Galen. We love to explore the remnants of this bygone era before the march of modern society wipes them out forever. Luckily, I live in the largest and least populated county in Virginia, so there are many abandoned homesteads and graveyards from the late 1700s through to the Civil War and the subsequent migration out of the war-torn South. Galen always has her voice recorder and camera at the ready. I usually man the video camera. She's gotten many EVPs and filmed countless orbs and ghostly manifestations. She truly puts those stupid ghost hunter shows on TV to shame. In our investigations, her one rule is to run if she says run, no questions. A rule that I obey maybe 75% of the time. About 10 miles from my house, up on a hill, sits a large mid-1800s mansion made inaccessible by a lack of a driveway and a tangled thicket of brush and briars. There were even vultures nesting on the chimney. Talk about spooky. Of course, Galen was itching to investigate. I would always make up an excuse not to go up there. It was too cold, too wet, too damn scary. But where most men would fear to tread, Galen goes, "Come on!" And she says it gleefully, which makes it that much more unnerving. So, giving in to the inevitable, we go out there to investigate. We parked my truck below the house about 50 yards away. It was a beautiful autumn day in the Appalachians, so I couldn't weasel my way out of it this time, and I had to admit I was curious as hell to see what was there. With the smell of sassafras and chimney smoke in the air, we started to make our way through the brush and trees. I was struck by the debris all around. I found a rusted-out machete, water bottles, and even an old smashed-up video camera. But the shoes, tennis shoes, and old moss-covered boots littered the ground. We finally hacked our way up to the front porch. It was magnificent in its decay, the ornate banisters and eaves crafted in a day where craftsmanship ruled and deadlines were an afterthought. The inside was bone dry for the most part. There were a lot of artifacts and clothing from previous tenants, and more shoes. There was even a TV from the 60s in one of the rooms, which seems to be the last time the house was occupied. We proceeded to explore the mansion room to room. We separated, Galen with her voice recorder and camera, and me with the video camera. I went out back and found an old well with cement all around it. I looked over the edge down into the well as best I could, and I thought I saw a pair of golden eyes, but it was hard to see, so I adjusted the viewer on the camera and held my hand over the hole. In the viewer, I could clearly see a pair of dark golden eyes glowing in the darkness of the hole. I was just about to cry out to Galen when I heard her shout, "Mike, get up here quick!" She was at the back of the house in what looked like the kitchen. Off to the side was another leaf and debris-covered room with a hatch door in the middle. It looked to be the door to a root cellar, so we made our way to the door. It reeked with the stench of death in the room, and it got stronger closer to the doorway, and there was what looked to be blood leading up to and down the steps. Galen went, "Look!" At the bottom of the steps was the carcass of a huge deer lying partially in the dim light of the small amount of sun that made its way in, and partially in the darkness of the root cellar. Now, I was kind of relieved, and I thought to myself, well, that explains the blood and the stench of death. I was just beginning to tell her I'm not going down there when the carcass suddenly and quickly was dragged out of the light into the dark. Now, I have to admit, one of us screamed, and I'm pretty sure it was me. Galen didn't have to yell run this time because we both bolted out of the room towards the front door. I let her go out first, down the steps into the brush. If we were to be eaten, best it was me first, but I had the keys to the goddamn truck. The things you think of when you're about to be killed. I got about 20 feet into the brush and looked back, and what I saw shook me to the core. In the darkness of the doorway, I saw two eyes glowing like brake lights of a semi-truck at night. I froze in my tracks. I was able to make out a dark shape in the darkness of the doorway. It looked like a huge dog or wolf, jet black with huge pointed ears on the top of its head. It was then that the eyes went into a malevolent squint, and then the motherfucker smiled at me. I could see the pure white teeth, the canines on either side, and the front teeth weren't rounded out like a dog's but went straight across. It had a flat, puggy snout, and I could see its nostrils flare as it lifted its head as if to get my scent. It then lowered its head and laser-eyed into mine, down to my soul. Its eyes were glowing so red that I innately felt that it had me, that I was his for the taking. I couldn't move, and I dropped to my knees hanging onto a tree. Right about that time, Galen yelled, "Mike!" with a hint of exasperation. The sound of her voice broke the hold it had on me, and I bolted, pressing the door lock remote of my key fob so Galen could get into the truck, and I got in too. Fired the ignition, dropped it in gear, and spun a rooster tail of dirt and gravel 20 feet into the air. "What the hell was that?" Galen said. "I don't know. Not sure myself what I've just seen. Maybe it's a bobcat?" "You're probably right," I replied, relieved in the fact that she'd not seen what I had. I was relieved that she hadn't looked into the eyes of this devil as I had, that the thing didn't know who she was, that she wasn't on his list as I seemed to be. Then Galen asked me, "Do you think you could go back sometime and get that TV for me?" I looked back in my rearview mirror at the house fading in the distance, with vultures flying about wondering what happened to their meal, and said, "We'll see," knowing full goddamn well I'd never go back there, not even travel on that road again. That was in the fall of 2016. Galen has since moved an hour away due to life, and so we don't get out as often. But all through the winter of 2016 into 2017, my encounter was in the back of my mind. Would that thing hunt me down? Was he scoping me out, waiting for the right time to strike? I live in a single-wide trailer next to a lake with my 2 rescue cats, Little Boy and Adam. I let them out at daybreak and bring them in at night. Little Boy likes to get up on the roof, as do a family of raccoons. Sometimes at night the raccoons will run across my roof, freaking me out. I hope it's the raccoons anyway. There have been a couple of times I've smelled the stench. It's the country and things do die out in the woods. But I don't go off my back porch at night. Later on in that spring of 2017, probably late May, I was driving in the country on Grays Bridge Road along the Pig River. It's a gravel road, and I decided to park and get out and look at the fish sunning themselves in the primeval-looking shallows of the swampy S-curves of the Pig. It was then that I thought I heard a baby cry. I heard it again, and it sounded like a demonic baby's cry, but I had to check it out. I have to admit that I was scared when I made my way to the sound. I drew my pistol. It's a Taurus Judge that shoots either 5 .45 caliber Colt cartridges or 410 shot. I usually keep it loaded with 4 shot and 1 bullet. I made my way through the scrub, and what I saw was heartbreaking. It was a dead mountain lion with its cub lying beside her body. I walked over to the scrawny cub, and it growled at me pitifully and tried to run, but it collapsed after only a few feet. The mother was ripped to shreds. Whatever had done this to them, she had fought mightily. About 10 feet over was an even sadder sight. It was another cub with its midsection completely eaten out up to the spine. I assumed this was the brother to what I later found out was his sister cub. She was missing an ear. Her eye was closed and covered in dried blood. I went back to my truck and got a Dollar General basket and jean jacket I had in the back. I put my arms into the jacket, and I used it to lift her up and put her in the basket. She didn't fight, resigned to her fate. I kept telling her, "You'll be fine. You'll be fine, baby girl." When I brought her home, my cats freaked out. Adam went running to the back, but Little Boy was right there, curious as usual. She was bigger than them, but in such a bad way that she was no threat. I got a warm cloth and cleaned her eye. It opened, and she'd not lost it as she'd lost her ear. She had 4 horizontal gashes on either side of her flanks. They weren't too deep and had scabbed up. I had some feline antibiotics, so I filled the syringe and squirted some into her mouth. The weird part was that she never fought me. I found that odd. I fixed up some warm milk and filled the syringe, and she drank that eagerly. I fixed up a box with some towels and put her in the back room. Little Boy, who has more empathy than most people, insisted on staying by the box. Adam, on the other hand, could give a shit. I ended up cutting out one side of the box so she could come and go. Little Boy would curl up with her. I went ahead and named her Jet because the gashes had healed, but the scars made her look aerodynamic and fast. She soon started eating Fancy Feast by the box. I ended up getting Alpo dog food that she ate heartily. I knew I should have called animal control, but I was afraid they'd put her down with the shape she was in. After about a week, she was up and about, little boy by her side. It was as if she had adopted him as her own brother. They would roll and play fight, and I could even pet her, but there was a look in her eyes, a lack of joy, as if she were on a mission. I wish I could say that she became my pet, that we were a family, but after about 4 weeks, she was playing with little boy in the front yard, and then she just disappeared. I knew it was inevitable that she would have to leave. She had a mission of revenge. Somehow I knew this to be true, and I, for one, hoped that she would succeed.
Here in this primitive river bottom wilderness in southern Arkansas, along with deer, duck, crane, and beaver, lurks a creature that walks upright. Whether it is a man, a monster, or a myth, no one really knows. What we do know is the people around Fouke, Arkansas say they have seen such a creature nearly 250 times since 1954. And that this creature, whatever it is, emits one of the most terrifying sounds ever recorded. Legend of Boggy Creek, rated G.
I've heard and read a lot of stories about people who've had encounters with Bigfoot or Dogman. I never really had any strong opinions about these stories, although I did accept the possibilities that these creatures existed. I figured that all of the eyewitnesses down through the years, all of the accounts and experiences most likely reflected something real. I'll tell you this too. What I witnessed on a hunting trip in the woods of South Georgia removed any doubt in my mind about the existence of either Bigfoot or Dogman. You see, I had heard of Bigfoot, of course, the years, decades of sightings, encounter stories, and so forth. But up until the experience I want to share with you, I'd never heard or read anything about this creature that people nowadays call Dogman. What I witnessed that warm September night was nothing short of a horrific nightmare come true. I've been an avid bow hunter for years, and that night I sat in a tree stand 20 feet high. It was a relatively early autumn night with a slight breeze and a clear sky, but with clouds coming in from the west. Somewhere off in the distance, I could hear what sounded like some kind of animal calls, but I couldn't really tell what it was. As I sat there, I tried to scan the dark landscape and listen even closer. I could tell that the sounds were slowly intensifying, but I still couldn't tell what they were and where they were coming from. Then I could hear disturbances in the forest. It seemed to be the sound of bramble and brush being thrashed, ripped, and torn as if from the very root. The entire forest seemed to come alive. The air became heavy and thick, and I felt as if I could feel the vibration of each motion, movement, and sound. It was almost as if time was being stretched out. suspended in a way in which seconds and moments extended out into infinity. Then came the shock of a lifetime. Hell, of 1,000 lifetimes. What happened next shook every notion or concept of reality that I had and exploded into a million pieces. From my left and from my right, I could see two enormous forms in the darkness moving rapidly toward each other. Brush, bushes, dirt being kicked up and slung everywhere. There was also the sound of powerful grunting and bellowing. As all of this came into focus, I got a clearer but more horrifying look at just what was happening. From the left and into a clearing was what looked like an enormous ape-like creature that had to be at least 8 feet tall. From the opposite direction came what I can only describe as a huge wolf-like creature. Now I say wolf-like because that's the closest I can really come in relaying to you what it seemed like to me. But what scared the red-hot shit out of me was that this thing was running on 2 legs. That's right, a monstrous upright walking, or in this case, running wolf. As the 2 creatures barreled toward each other, it occurred to me that I had a ringside seat to the ultimate territorial dispute. Even up in my tree stand, I could feel the vibration being made by the 2 roaring monsters. Even the sounds of their growls and roars moved through the air with fiery percussion. At some point during all of this, it dawned on me that the giant ape creature must be Bigfoot. What the hell else could it be? And what was this huge wolf creature? The monsters crashed into each other, and it was almost like a clap of thunder. Then it was like both creatures vanished into a swirling tornado. It was a mad vortex of claws, fur, fists, and fangs. I could hear the fierce snarls along with ferocious pounding noises, and also the sound of brush being thrashed. I could hear screams of rage and pain flying out into the night air as I watched a living nightmare unfold before my very eyes. I was also growing more than a little worried about getting myself down that damn tree and out of the area whenever and however this thing played itself out. But for the present, I wasn't moving 1 goddamn inch. Then something amazing and horrifying happened. The whirlwind of motion faded, and I could see the Sasquatch literally holding the Dogman by the throat, up in the air, pounding its head with his enormous fist and thrashing it insanely. Finally, the Dogman hung there, battered, bleeding, and limp as a rag doll. The Sasquatch squeezed its hand, and I could hear bones shattering, crunching, and disintegrating beneath its great strength. After a few moments, the Sasquatch slammed the Dogman carcass to the ground and released a splintering roar, which I took to be a call of victory and also a warning. It seemed as though the entire forest came alive as the roar cut through the dark landscape. As I sat there, I could see the Bigfoot surveying its immediate surroundings, looking from side to side and sniffing up into the air. Just as I took notice of this, a light rain began to fall. The Sasquatch turned slowly and started to lumber back in the direction from which it came. I watched it until it finally disappeared into the black forest mist. Now, you can just about guess that my first course of action was getting down out of that stand, up the trail about 300 yards and into my truck. Once on the ground, I walked as swiftly as I could, as for whatever reason, there was something in the back of my mind telling me not to run. I kept looking to my right and then to my left through the raindrops as I moved back up the trail, and every now and again turned to look to my rear, but not too often because it felt as if this slowed my progress. When I got to my truck, I let out an exhale as if I had been holding my breath all the way up the trail. As I loaded my gear and got into the truck, I felt the rain pick up a bit. I started the engine, took a deep breath, and pulled out of there. I hit the highway a few minutes later. All the way down the road, I kept thinking to myself, tonight I saw something that very few people, if anyone, had ever seen. 2 creatures who many people don't even think exist clashing in mortal combat for territorial supremacy, if that in fact was what it was all about. Now, you might think that I was somehow psychologically scarred or traumatized by what I'd seen. It is true that it was horrifying, and I will never forget that night. But when I got home, I took a hot shower, made myself a whiskey highball, and watched college football until about 1 a.m. And that night, I slept just fine. My Dogman encounter goes back to the early 80s on a trip down to the Snake River, which was about 5 miles from the town we lived in. This was in eastern Oregon. Lots of sagebrush and hills. It was at the beginning of winter, so there was only a slight amount of snow on the ground. It was going to be a full moon that night, and we knew it would be a spectacular view of the river. Me, my wife Liz, my sister Ann, and her boyfriend Pete were in our 1968 Mustang and totally into the groove. We got some Knob Creek, and I had a bundle of cigars. We were just going to relax and enjoy the night. It was about 11 o'clock when we headed out. The place we were going was a recreation area where people could camp, launch their boats, and so forth. To get into the place, you have to leave the main road. Dirt and gravel dipped down toward the boat docks and then made a loop onto the upper portion of the parking area. So everything was going well. The moon lit things up enough that you could make out shapes around you. We just parked the car and were talking. My wife lit her cigarette. We were in the front seats. Ann and Pete were in the back. Just as I was getting ready to light up a cigar, I saw something moving out in front of the car, maybe 20 yards out. My first thought was maybe that it was a deer. I turned to offer Pete a cigar and saw it moving to the right of the car. My sister knew something was up right away. She was about to ask what was wrong when she saw this thing moving toward the back of the car. We both said, "What's that?" The guys asked what, and we said, "Something's out there." They started to laugh, but then they saw it moving around to the left of the car. At that point, I got goosebumps all over my body, and I had a very bad feeling about the situation. This thing moved around to the front of the car again, but I noticed it was closer than before. At that point, I was getting worried about what was going on. In fact, I was getting spooked. Of course, the guys wanted to know what it was. This thing had circled the car once more, and when it got in front again, I hit the headlights. Nothing. What the hell? It'd been right there just a second before. God damn it. When I turned on the headlights, it was on the right side of the car again, much closer than before. We just couldn't tell what it was at that point. By this time, my sister was freaking out, and so was I. Everyone started yelling at me to get us the fuck out of there. I was creeped out enough by that point too, so I started the car, slammed it into reverse, and spun out of there backwards, heading for the loop so that we could get back to the main road. Now, we thought we were in the clear, but just then the scariest thing I've ever experienced up until that time in my life happened. As we began to climb out of the edge of the headlights, but in plain view, a creature appeared. It was an incredibly large wolf. It stood upright like a person, but was skinny and covered with a long kind of silvery brown hair. It turned when the headlights hit it, and we were so close to this goddamn thing we could see lots of detail. The thing looked directly into my eyes, and I swear it was giving me a good once-over, as if to memorize my face or something. Its eyes had dark pupils, and the look in them was like looking at a madman. Pure evil and insanity seemed to be the only thing in them. As soon as this happened, which couldn't have been more than a few seconds, I hit the fucking gas and was aiming right for it. I was going to take this motherfucker out. Then it moved so fast, it was almost a blur, and it was gone. How it even got caught in our headlights, I don't know. All I know is that we tore ass out of there as fast as we could. We were out in what was essentially the middle of nowhere. No homes, no businesses, no nothing. Now the truth is, we didn't know what we were looking at. We didn't know what we'd seen. But the only thing that came to mind was werewolf. Later on, I saw that Stephen King werewolf movie, Silver Bullet, and the thing we saw looked almost exactly like the werewolf in the film. Also, since that time, a shitload of other really creepy things have happened out in that area. UFO sightings and sightings of other weird humanoid type beings. I'll never go there again. Of course, the thing we saw that night is what today everybody calls Dogman. You know, a few years ago, I did a sketch of the creature lurking along a dark roadside. And my wife jokingly suggested that I add a road sign to the drawing and that the sign should read, Dogman, dead ahead. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta.
It took Beethoven 4 years to write that symphony. Some things can't be rushed. Good music and good wine. Paul Masson's Emerald Dry. A delicious white wine. Paul Masson wines taste so good because they're made with such care. What Paul Masson himself said nearly a century ago is still true today. We will sell no wine before it's time.
The Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest in northern Georgia comprises 2 U.S. national forests, the Oconee National Forest in eastern Georgia and the Chattahoochee National Forest located in the North Georgia mountains. Now we're talking about over 1,300 square miles of woodland, including mountainous regions. It's a beautiful part of the state, and whether you're an avid outdoorsman or a casual nature lover, it's got everything you could ever want. Hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, boating. Like I said, everything. You see, I'm a writer by trade, and I've been working on a manuscript, an interesting story, at least I thought so, about the back and forth espionage that was going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Bay of Pigs operation, and also the Cuban Missile Crisis. Anyway, I'd seen something online about visiting upstate in the national forest areas. They had nice cabins for rent, and I could spend 4 or 5 days enjoying the area and do some writing in a peaceful, relaxed atmosphere. So I went to one of the websites and booked a cabin for 5 days. It was a Wednesday, so I figured I could do some trip shopping the next day, get everything organized, and I could head out first thing Friday morning. I ended up getting a couple of steaks, of course, bacon and eggs, a package of brats, and the obligatory pack of chicken wings. I also made sure to pick up a bottle of Hennessy and a bottle of Crown Royal, perfect for chilled mountain evenings, all capped off with a box of hand-rolled Dominican cigars. Well, Friday morning came, and I loaded everything into the car, cooler and all. I stopped to get some coffee, and 5 minutes later I was cruising north on Interstate 75. Now, from everything I've told you so far, you're probably thinking that everything was set up for a great retreat up in the North Georgia mountains. A wondrous excursion into the heart of one of our great national forests. Well, I'll tell you this. That great, enjoyable writing nature retreat turned into a hellish experience and was without a doubt the most frightening experience of my life. It all started my second night there. Strange howling just as the sun began to set. It seemed a little strange, but I can't say that I thought too much about it. I lit a cigar, refreshed my drink, opened my laptop, started some jazz on Pandora, and started banging out a few lines. Things all changed just a few minutes later when I started hearing weird noises outside. It was like the sounds of scratching, scurrying, and rustling in the brush and undergrowth all around the cabin. So now, with the howling and then the other sounds, I really started wondering and worrying about what the fuck was going on out there. And it didn't stop either. In fact, it amped up to bumps and poundings on the walls of the cabin. It was as if something was going all around the cabin outside and trying to figure out a way in, or at least terrorize the shit out of me. Then it was at the door. At first, just scratching, which after about 30 seconds, it turned into a full-scale pounding. You can imagine at this point, I was in full bust-out panic. What the fuck was this thing? The pounding got to the point where I could hear the wood start to crack. I kept thinking, how in the hell did I end up in some shit like this? Trapped in a damn cabin with some kind of fucking monster trying to knock the door down. The only thing I could think to do was to try to brace myself up against the door and hope that whatever this thing was would give up. That was a dumbass move. The thing let out a sinister growl and leveled 2 insane pounds on the door, and 2 things happened. First, the force threw me back and down flat on my ass. Second, the door split open halfway down the middle. That's when I finally saw it. It looked like a gigantic wolf with jet black fur and the biggest goddamn head you can imagine. It growled and snarled, showing its big-ass sharp teeth. So I'm there picking myself up off the floor, watching this wolf thing try to force its way in and rip my guts out. Then, as if the shit could get any crazier, I heard gunshots. Somebody was out there firing at the wolf thing. I could even hear the creature being struck, and it would jerk from the impact of the bullets. The creature snarled again, then backed itself away and took off with insane speed. There were a few more gunshots as the creature dashed away into the forest. I was greeted at what was left of the cabin door by 2 men in ranger uniforms. I saw the Forestry Service logo patch on their jackets. They identified themselves and asked if I was injured. I told them that aside from having a sore ass and being scared shitless, I was okay. I asked them what the hell that thing was, and I was surprised at the level of information they were willing to share. They said it was a thing called a Dogman, and that every year they were known to come down out of the highest, most isolated parts of the mountains hunting deer. This, according to the Rangers, was the first case of one of these things trying to break into a building and come after a person. The Rangers asked how long I planned to stay, and I told them just as long as it took me to pack up my shit, load the car, and get the hell down the highway. They were very subtle in suggesting that I didn't make too much out of what had happened. I wondered later if that meant that they knew I was a writer and had some concern about what I might put out there for the public. Well, fuck that. I'm sharing my story with you because everyone needs to know that these things are real and they're deadly. Trust me, I looked right into the eyes of one that wanted to kill me. I was lucky. I lived to tell the tale of what happens when there's a wolf at the door. The following story happened to one of my closest friends. It was told to me the next morning as he sat upset and scared in his kitchen. This affected me deeply as this friend is one of the most fearless and capable people I've ever met. Just to show you how calm and unexcitable he is, I'll share one brief incident from his past. While sleeping in the back of his pickup truck one night in a very remote part of the southeast Idaho desert, he told me he was startled out of a deep sleep by the uneasy feeling of being watched. Upon opening his eyes, he was surprised to see a gray, hairy, man-like face leaning over the side of the pickup bed watching him sleep. He quickly sat upright, startling the creature, which he watched bound away in the moonlight through the sage brush and lava rock. When he told me this, I asked, "What did you do?" He answered, "I went back to sleep. I was tired." As I said, not very excitable. So when I saw him that morning in his kitchen, scared and shaken, it affected me deeply. Anyway, here's what happened. My friend and I had just moved to Portland, Oregon after college. One day he asked me if he could borrow my .357 Magnum to take on a deer archery hunt he was planning the next weekend. He didn't think he'd need to use it, but was somewhat concerned about the large bear population where he'd be hunting. I loaned it to him, and he arrived at the hunting site deep in the woods at the end of a logging road around twilight. Wanting to start hunting first thing the next morning, he rode his mountain bike into the dark to where he'd hung up his stand to spread some scent and make sure his shooting lanes were still open, etc. As he was crouched down, dribbling dough and heat urine on a bush, he felt the presence of something behind him. He stood and turned, reaching for the only light he'd brought with him, one of those little keyring LED lights that turn on when you squeeze it. He squeezed the light on and saw a pretty large set of eyes about 3 feet off the ground reflect back at him. The LED light was too weak to show anything else, just a reflection of those eyes. He was thinking that it was normal that a bear or deer would mistake him for an animal. After all, he was crouched down and smelled like deer urine. He stood up straight, clapped his hands together and said, "Get out of here," in a firm voice, expecting that the confused animal would bolt away when it realized he was human. But his actions did not bring the expected result. Instead of turning and running away, the eyes slowly rose to over 9 feet tall and took a step towards him. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread and quickly pulled the .357 out of the holster. Holding the revolver in one hand and the squeezed LED light in the other hand, he backed away from the eyes. Every step he took backwards, the eyes matched by advancing towards him, but always staying just out of the ring of light emitted by the keyring. In a short time, he was backed up against a large tree, which he used to protect his back while he watched the eyes observe him from about 10 feet away. The eyes would weave back and forth like a large animal, adjusting his weight from side to side. They would rise and lower slightly like something was studying him from different angles. The impression that he got was that this was some kind of monster wolf. It reminded him, he said, of the creatures in that movie, The Howling. He kept thinking to himself, "It's a fucking monster. It's an actual goddamn wolf monster, and it looks like it wants to rip my goddamn head off." The way it moved, the sound of the leaves under its feet as it walked, the impressive amounts of air that were inhaled and exhaled as it breathed, and most of all, the height of the eyes as they towered over him all indicated a creature of massive size. After what seemed like an eternity, he lost sight of the eyes, but he could hear the animal circling his position. Now, more than an hour had passed since the last noise or sighting of eyes. My friend was sitting with his back against the tree and a cocked .357 in his hand, decided it would be safe to leave the area. It was now around 1 o'clock in the morning. He started walking to where he left his mountain bike. To his dismay, he heard the animal paralleling him in the thick brush. The beast followed him to his bike. Not wanting to lose his sense of hearing, his only warning of the animal's position, he chose to push his bike back to the truck instead of riding. It took him over 4 damn hours to push the bike back to his camp. When he thought the animal was too close, judging by the sounds it made in the underbrush, he would stop and wait. Every time he stopped, the animal would inevitably start to circle him again. When it sounded like its circuitous route took it a little farther away from my friend, he would start pushing his bicycle again, only to repeat the same routine every 10 minutes or so throughout the torturous night. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, he reached his vehicle, and in an adrenaline and panic-induced sprint, he threw his bike in the back, started the truck, and was headed down the mountain. It took several miles before the heavy sense of doom started to recede. As the adrenaline wore off, the shake started. He started shaking so bad that it was all he could do to keep his truck on the road until he pulled up to his house and into a kitchen chair. That's where I found him a while later when I went over to his house to feed and water his dog. After he told me what happened to him, I offered to go back with him and retrieve his camping gear and the tree stand. He refused the offer and left his possessions to nature rather than return to the area. Even though he hunts and fishes as avidly as ever, he'll never go back to that spot and avoids the entire region at all costs. And I don't blame him. After all, who wants to come face to face with a bloodthirsty, murderous Dogman?
Times 2 beans is 4 beans. Nescafe uses lots more beans. 10 beans times 4 beans and add 3 more beans make 43 rich coffee beans. Yes, you get 43 beans in every cup of Nescafe real coffee beans. That's all there is in Nescafe. 43 beans in every cup make Nescafe the all coffee instant coffee with the let's have another cup taste.
Extra beans means extra flavor. Today's Nescafe goes all the way for flavor with 43 choice beans in every cup.
I've been wanting to tell this story ever since the events surrounding what I'm about to disclose took place in October of 2015. I need to say at the outset that I will not be using my real name, nor the names of any of the men I worked with. In addition, I've changed the names of specific locations and other important details that, if widely known, would jeopardize the well-being of a lot of people. For the purposes of what I'm about to tell you, call me Connor. I'm enlisted in the United States Army. My rank cannot be disclosed. In the summer of 2015, I became attached to a highly specialized 12-man unit that was referred to as Special Operations and Containment Team, or SOCOT. We called ourselves Apache Squad because we were fast, highly mobile, and quite frankly, every man in that squad was more than capable in the right set of circumstances of being a cool, efficient killer. Now, one thing that you have to understand, Apache Squad specialized in going into areas that were known to have, how should I put it, a concentration of high strangeness, particularly when it involves strange or unusual creatures. You see, regardless of what a lot of people might think, a lot of these things are 100% real. I don't mean pixies and elves either. I mean straight up motherfucking monsters. The kind that can terrorize and even kill people. That's right. It's been happening for a long time, and when it does happen, or even when there's the threat of it happening, that's when we went to work. Now, in this situation, we learned during our team briefing that our mission target was in the southeastern region of the U.S., the Deep South. That's as specific as I'm going to get on that. But it was the specific subject of the briefing that got all the eyebrows on our squad raised. We were going after a group of gray 220s. Now, for everybody who's listening to this, gray 220s is a code word for what everybody nowadays calls Dogman. That's right. These incredibly large, fast, vicious, upright walking canine monsters that you probably heard a lot of bullshit about on the internet. Let me tell you something about these things. Regardless of the mindless dumb fucks that you hear talking about these creatures on social media, They're not demons. They have nothing to do with skinwalkers. And for God's sakes, they have nothing to do with werewolves. Now, those are all real things to be sure, and I'll probably have more to say about all that later. But for now, I'll keep it to the issue at hand. You see, we know that these damn things are extraterrestrial. That's right. They're fucking alien interlopers who don't come in and out of a vortex. They got here on nuts and bolts interstellar vehicles starting about 2700 BC. That's right. These sons of bitches have been on this planet for more than 4,700 years. And for that whole time, they've been up to no good. So in our mission briefing, we were told about a particular area where the Gray 220s were known to be habituating. And additionally, that there had been a number of sightings and also a number of unexplained disappearances. Then came the most disturbing part. There had been 2 officially unexplained mutilation murders where the victims were partially consumed. That was what raised the threat level to the point that warranted our intervention. We were choppered in and dropped into the target zone just before dusk, which we loved. We were going in with cold, hard steel at the brink of twilight. We hit the ground running, and right away our tech engineer guy, who of course we had nicknamed Scotty, got a perimeter monitoring network set up in almost no time. It didn't take long either before we started getting hits on the thermal. Now, I don't mean thermal hits from deer or raccoons or bears. I mean clear, unmistakable imaging that ruled all that other stuff out. It was almost like these damn things had been waiting on us. But if they wanted to get some shit going, we were going to give them all they wanted. Then the howling started. It came from every direction, and man, these howls were loud and they went through you like a percussive tidal wave. We all knew that this was a signal that they were coming in. The first one came in from the left, and Briggs, who was positioned at the extreme left of the perimeter, opened up with an M249. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how these things are almost impervious to gunfire, and to an extent it's true when it comes to more conventional weapons. What I can tell you, though, is that our ammunition is of a much higher level manufacturer, and Briggs' fire ripped that son of a bitch's chest wide open, and it hit the ground in mid-stride. Then Scotty came over the radio. All points, here they come. Then it was on. They came in from every direction on all fours. Every point of the perimeter was manned. From what we could determine, there were 8 of them. As they neared our position, they began to rear up and stand on 2 legs. And I gave the order to engage. Man, I'm telling you, these damn things moved like lightning, and they were huge. There wasn't one that was less than 7 feet tall. They roared, growled, and screamed. They threw big rocks and broken tree branches at us. In return, we introduced them to the M500, which is a 12-gauge, 5-round shotgun. I saw 2 go down with holes in them the size of a basketball. The main thing was not to let these motherfuckers get too close. They were bigger, stronger, and faster than us, and there was no such thing as a winnable hand-to-hand situation. So we kept the fire hot on them until we had no more mobile target heat signatures. The perimeter went quiet. Right on cue, we heard the choppers coming in. The retrieval team would be in to do a full sweep and removal. 8 less of these monsters in the world. The debriefing was pretty much ho-hum and by the book, and we were all beneficiaries of a 6-week leave and the nondescript deposit of $100,000 in our bank accounts, which of course had nothing to do with regular Army pay. I took a vacation to Key West to do some saltwater fishing. Later on, we got together for a few barbecues, cigars, and scotch. We would sit around laughing, talking, and placing bets on what the next call would be. But whatever it was, Apache Squad would be ready. And no matter what, we will succeed because of our highest ideals, honor, sacrifice, and dedication to the time-tested warrior's rules of engagement. My encounter with the Dogman took place 3 years ago. It's something that I can never forget. Since that time, I've done a lot of reading about Dogman and heard many of the stories about other people's sightings and encounters. There's a lot being written and talked about these creatures on the internet. A lot of it's nonsense and bullshit conjured up by 30-year-old fat guys living in their mother's basements. Now, to the people who ask me about my experience because they want to go out and hunt or look for these creatures, I say this. People are free to do whatever they want, but based on my encounter, I think anybody going out to find these creatures or see these creatures or whatever the hell they want to do is just a damn fool. My encounter took place on the first day of summer break from my job as a college professor. After 2 long semesters of U.S. history and introduction to ancient civilizations, I was damn sure looking forward to 12 weeks of fun, relaxation, and enjoyment. I could catch up on my reading, blur my eyes with endless movies and baseball games, and do some fishing and maybe mix in a road trip or two. So, like I said, on that first day of vacation, I got a couple of rods and reels together, tackle box, packed an overnight bag, including half a box of cohibas and a bottle of Hennessy, loaded up my cooler with some chicken wings, deviled eggs, sandwiches, and Coca-Colas. I got the car loaded up, lit a cigar, cranked up the music, and hit the highway. An hour and a half later, I was in the North Georgia mountains. I checked into the hotel, got into my room, and enjoyed a club sandwich. Eagle Lake was only a 10-minute drive from the hotel, so I planned to get out there, do a few hours worth of fishing, sip some Hennessy, and listen to some baseball on the radio. That's right, I have an old school AM/FM radio so I can listen to music or sports without relying on a damn internet connection. So there I was, sitting in my folding chair, making my first casts into the lake. I had 2 rods, one with a bobber set at about 3.5–4 feet, and another just with a hook and sinker to go right to the bottom. So whether it was brim, crappie, perch, or catfish, I had the lake covered from top to bottom. I clicked on the radio and pulled up a jazz station, which I was excited to lock in on up in the mountains. I dipped my tumbler into the cooler to scoop up some ice and added the Hennessy. Now we're getting there. I toasted the end of a cohiba, rotated and took a few puffs until it was perfectly lit. Now we're all the way there. And of course, that's when things went from picture perfect to absolute shit blizzard. From out of nowhere, and I mean out of nowhere, a big rock came flying through the air and hit the lake about 10 feet from the shoreline where I was sitting. Now, I said the rock was big, but I'm not trying to say that it was a boulder or anything. But this thing was easily bigger than a brick and plunked down in the water with considerable splash and spray. I thought to myself, what the hell is going on here? Is someone back in the bushes messing with me? And how far can somebody throw a rock that size anyway? The brush was easily 50 feet away, if not more. While I was trying to figure all of this out, I heard a very low growl coming from the thicket, the same direction that the rock had come from. It was incredibly low, and the rumble of it started to concern me. What the hell is this? Almost as if on cue, the bushes started to shake and shudder as I saw what I can only describe as a giant wolf protrude its head out of the bushes. Then, as if it could possibly get crazier, this thing reared up and stood on 2 legs. Also at that moment, this thing let out a screaming roar that hit me like a shockwave. Man, I can tell you, I've never been so goddamn scared in all my life. I was literally shaking with terror. This thing had a look on its face like it wanted to rip my heart right out of my chest. Then, to my surprise, this thing fell back down on 4 legs and backed away into the brush and disappeared. I got everything, and I mean everything, back into the trunk of my car in less than 2 minutes and tore ass out of there like a crazy man. I hit the highway, got back to the hotel, got the rest of my belongings, checked out, and headed back down the highway to the city. How did I spend the rest of my summer vacation? Going to the movies and exploring some cool, interesting places in Midtown, art galleries, cafes, and little chic out-of-the-way places. I bought baseball tickets and sat there for all 9 innings. I was fairly sure that way, I'd never have to deal with a damn Dogman ever again. My encounter with the creatures that are now called Dogmen happened 5 years ago at a remote cabin near Moosehead Lake in Maine. My longtime friend, a guy named Joe, and I made the long drive to the cabin up from Bangor the day before. I brought along a pair of Mossberg Patriots, each with the classic walnut stock. Joe brought his Browning X-Bolt. Besides these, we also had a small assortment of sidearms. We'd been anxious to get started because we were right up against the end of the hunting season, which was the 30th of November. It was a cold day, but mostly clear, with decent snowfall already on the ground. As it happened, we were able to essentially bag the limit our first time out, a moose and 2 deer. We got the truck loaded up and got back to the cabin about an hour or so before nightfall. We stored the carcasses in a little 20 by 20 foot shack behind the cabin. Anyway, we got back inside, put some steaks on the stove, started a pot of coffee going, and found a football game on the radio. We could hear the wind picking up slightly, but with a good fire going, we really didn't give it a second thought. After dinner, we broke open some Jack Daniels and lit our cigars, broke into some generalized conversation with the football game buzzing in the background. That's when we heard the first howl. It came at us from a distance and then zoomed in with a vengeance. We both looked at each other with that, "What the fuck was that?" kind of expression. We'd both heard coyotes out there a million times before, and that's not what this was. It was big, deep, and menacing. I have to admit that we were both unnerved. Both Joe and I had been hunting basically since we were old enough to hold a rifle, and we were both well past the stage of jumping every time we heard a weird noise. But this was different. This was startling at the very least, and frankly, when I think back on it, downright frightening. We went to the door, opened it, and scanned the immediate landscape. That was a big goddamn mistake. 2 things happened. First, more howling started. I mean, multiple howls, one overlapping the other. And we both knew that whatever these things were, they were close by. Secondly, out of the darkness, we saw figures emerging. We counted 5. But here was the crazy shit. Some of them seemed to be on 4 legs, and some on 2. They were positioned in a way that suggested an approach from the shack. That meant that these things most probably caught the scent of the moose and deer carcasses and tried to get into the shack. They also could smell the food that we cooked as well, and circled halfway around the cabin. As we focused our eyes adjusting to the moonlight, Joe lost it. It was relatively clear, and we could see that these things were basically gigantic wolves. Their heads were huge, larger than any bear I'd ever seen by far. Joe said, "These damn things can walk on 2 legs. What the hell?" All I knew was it was dark. We were in an isolated cabin, and we were being stalked by 5 big-ass wolves that could walk upright, and they looked like they meant business. That's how I broke it all down to Joe. I told him, "We have a cabinet full of ammo, and if we have to, we can make these motherfuckers sorry they were ever born." I closed and bolted the door, got my cabinet key, and pulled out 5 boxes of ammo. The Mossbergs had a 5-round capacity, so we loaded them both and double-checked all the sidearms. Joe's Browning had a 4-round capacity, and we made sure it was loaded and ready to go too. Meanwhile, the howling was accompanied by very low growls that literally reverberated in the walls. So at this point, Joe's nerves had calmed to a reasonable level, and we positioned ourselves at the 2 front windows, each about 3 feet to the left and right of the front door. I fired the first shot, and then it was on. The wolves started ducking and darting, snarling and growling, scrambling around in every direction, but always seemed to keep their eyes on the front of the cabin. Each time they made a move, it was as if they were trying to make some kind of advance in our direction, but were discouraged by our fire. In all honesty, Joe and I are both above average marksmen, and we both recognize that while our rounds didn't seem to strike lethal blows, they certainly were working as a deterrent. It also became clear to the two of us that the Dogmen were much more sensitive to strikes to the face and head than to the torso. So that's how we focused our fire. Now, sitting here now, relating this story to you, I honestly can't tell you exactly how long the battle, if you want to call it that, lasted. I don't remember looking at the clock over the fireplace. The nightmarish quality of it all makes it feel like it was interminable. But at some point, as we fired, the wolf creatures faded back into the darkness, howling as they went. I know for a fact that I'd pumped out at least 50 rounds. The floor was littered with shells. As you might guess, we didn't sleep that night, but damn sure had more Jack Daniels and kept the fire blazing all night. We agreed between the two of us to pack up everything and get the hell out of there in the morning. And that's what we did. The drive back to Bangor was mostly quiet, aside from the radio and the contrived chit-chat that was generally just for the purposes of sort of getting things back to normal. I guess that's why I decided to share this story, because there really is no such thing as getting back to normal after something like this. So, that's what happened. That's the story. These creatures are real. I don't give a shit about who thinks that it doesn't make sense, or that we don't have digital, crystal clear photos or videos of what happened to us. So, maintain your skepticism at your own peril. If that's your view or perspective, and if you'd been in that situation that me and my friend were in, my guess is you'd be dead now.